The courthouse was finally quiet after a long day. Judge Amelia Richardson sat in her office, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the evening sky. She had just finished one of the toughest cases of her career. The trial had lasted 3 weeks, and today she had delivered the final verdict. It felt good to know that justice had been served, but she was exhausted. At 45 years old, Amelia had seen it all in her 20 years as a lawyer and 5 years as a judge. She had worked her way up from a small law firm to becoming one of the most respected judges in the county. People knew her for being fair, smart, and never backing down from what was right. She packed her briefcase slowly, thinking about the day ahead tomorrow. More cases, more decisions, more responsibility. Sometimes she wondered if all the hard work was worth it. Then she remembered why she became a lawyer in the first place. To help people and make sure everyone got treated fairly, no matter who they were or where they came from. Time to head home, she said to herself, turning off the lights in her office. But as she walked to the parking garage, she changed her mind. Her husband was working late tonight, and her teenage daughter was at a friend's house studying. The house would be empty and quiet. Maybe too quiet after such a busy day. Instead of going straight home, Amelia decided to treat herself. There was a nice restaurant downtown that she had been wanting to try. She had heard the food was amazing, and she deserved a good meal after the day she had. She walked to her car, a beautiful black BMW that she had bought last year. It was her dream car, something she had worked towards for years. Every time she saw it, she felt proud of how far she had come. Growing up, her family didn't have much money. Her parents worked 2 jobs each just to pay the bills. They always told her that education was the key to a better life. Work hard, study hard, and you can achieve anything, her mother used to say. And she was right, the restaurant was perfect. Amelia sat by the window enjoying a delicious dinner and a glass of wine. She watched people walking by outside, couples holding hands, families with children, business people rushing to catch trains. The city was alive with energy, and for the first time all day she felt relaxed. She took her time with dinner, reading a book she had brought along. It was a mystery novel, something light and fun. After dealing with real legal cases all day, she enjoyed reading fictional stories where everything worked out in the end. The waiter was friendly and attentive. He recognized her from the local news and thanked her for her service to the community. It made her feel good to know that people appreciated the work she did. "Your Honor," he said with a smile, "it's an honor to have you dining with us tonight." "Please, just call me Amelia," she replied. "I'm just enjoying a quiet dinner like everyone else." After finishing her meal and paying the check, Amelia felt refreshed and ready to head home. She had enjoyed the break from her routine, and the good food had given her energy. She left a generous tip for the waiter and gathered her purse and jacket. The evening air was cool and crisp as she stepped outside. It was that perfect temperature where you didn't need a coat, but could feel autumn coming. The street was quieter now, with fewer people around than when she had arrived. Most of the shops were closing and the restaurants were starting to wind down. She walked slowly to her car, enjoying the peaceful moment. This was her favorite time of day, when the busy world started to slow down and she could think clearly. She thought about her family, her work, and all the things she was grateful for. As she approached her BMW, she reached into her purse for her keys. They felt different somehow, lighter than usual. She looked down and realized she was holding her house keys instead of her car keys. She must have grabbed the wrong set when she left the restaurant. Getting old, she laughed to herself, digging through her purse again. She found the right keys and pressed the unlock button. The car's lights flashed and she heard the familiar beep that meant the doors were open. She loved that sound. It meant she was going home to her family, to her comfortable bed, to another day of making a difference in the world. But as she reached for the door handle, she heard the screech of tires behind her. Car doors slammed and heavy footsteps approached quickly. Her peaceful evening was about to take a turn that would change everything. She turned around slowly, her hand still on the car door. A police officer was walking toward her with quick, aggressive steps. His face was hard and unfriendly, and his hand was near his belt where his weapons were kept. "Step away from that vehicle right now," he shouted at her. Amelia's heart started beating faster. She had no idea what was happening or why this officer was yelling at her. She looked around to see if there was some kind of emergency, or if he was talking to someone else. But the street was empty except for the two of them. "Excuse me, officer," she said politely. trying to understand what was going on. The officer's eyes were cold and suspicious as he looked at her. She could see anger in his face, but she didn't know why. She had done nothing wrong. She was just getting into her own car after a nice dinner. "I said step away from the car," he repeated even louder this time. That's when it hit her. This wasn't about anything she had done. This was about who she was and what she looked like. This was about the color of her skin and the assumptions this officer was making based on nothing but prejudice. In that moment, everything changed. Her peaceful evening was shattered. The quiet street suddenly felt dangerous, and Judge Amelia Richardson realized that all her success, all her achievements, all her respect in the community meant nothing to this officer who saw her as nothing more than a criminal. The confrontation that would test everything she believed in was just beginning. Officer Derek Thompson had been driving through the wealthy downtown area when he spotted something that made him suspicious. A black woman standing next to an expensive BMW. In his 12 years as a police officer, Derek had developed what he called street smarts, but what others might call racial prejudice. Derek was the kind of cop who believed he could tell a criminal just by looking at them. He had grown up in a small town where everyone looked like him, and he had never really questioned his assumptions about people who didn't. Over the years, those assumptions had hardened into beliefs that guided everything he did on the job. He had gotten several complaints filed against him for the way he treated people, especially people of color. But Derek always found ways to justify his actions. He told himself he was just being careful, just doing his job, just protecting the community. He never stopped to think about how his behavior affected the people he encountered. When he saw Amelia standing by the BMW, his mind immediately jumped to conclusions. In his worldview, a black woman in this expensive neighborhood near such a fancy car could only mean one thing: trouble. Maybe she was a car thief. Maybe she was casing the area for a break-in. Maybe she was involved with drugs. He didn't consider any legitimate reason she might be there. Derek hit the brakes hard and pulled his patrol car over to the curb. The tires made a loud screeching sound that echoed through the quiet street. He was in a hurry to catch what he was sure was a crime in progress. In his mind, he was about to be a hero. He jumped out of his car quickly, his equipment belt jangling with all the tools of his trade: handcuffs, radio, pepper spray, and his service weapon. His whole body language screamed aggression and suspicion. He walked with the swagger of someone who believed he had all the power in the situation. Derek's face was twisted into a scowl as he approached Amelia. He had already decided she was guilty of something, even though he didn't know what. This was how he approached most situations, with his mind already made up based on his prejudices rather than on any actual evidence. "Step away from that vehicle right now," he shouted, his voice carrying all the authority he could muster. His hand moved instinctively to hover near his weapon. This was a technique he used to intimidate people, to show them that he was in charge and that he could escalate the situation if he wanted to. It was a display of power designed to make people comply quickly and without question. Amelia was completely shocked by the aggressive approach. She had been having such a peaceful evening, and suddenly she was being treated like a dangerous criminal. She couldn't understand what she had done wrong or why this officer was being so hostile. "Excuse me, officer, but this is my car," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and respectful. Even though she was a judge who commanded respect in courtrooms every day, even though she was used to being an authority, she knew that on this street corner, her position meant nothing to this officer. All he saw was her skin color, and that was enough for him to assume the worst. Derek laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that was meant to be insulting and dismissive. He had heard this story before, or at least he thought he had. In his experience, everyone claimed innocence, everyone had an excuse, everyone said it was their car or their money or their drugs. "Yeah, right," he said with sarcasm dripping from his voice. "A car like this? In this neighborhood?" "I don't think so, lady." He looked at the BMW with its shiny paint and expensive features. In Derek's mind, there was no way this woman could legitimately own such a vehicle. He had already decided what kind of person she was based on nothing but his own biases and prejudices. "I'm betting this vehicle was reported stolen," he continued, stepping closer to Amelia in a way that was meant to intimidate her. "And you just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." Derek was so confident in his assumption that he didn't even bother to check if the car had actually been reported stolen. He didn't call it in to dispatch. He didn't look for any evidence of forced entry or damage to the vehicle. He just assumed he was right because that's what he always did. Amelia felt her heart racing as the situation escalated. She had dealt with difficult people in her courtroom before, but this was different. In court, she had the protection of bailiffs and the respect that came with her position. Here on the street, she was just another black woman being harassed by a police officer who had already decided she was guilty. She knew she had to be very careful. She had seen too many situations like this go wrong. She knew that any sudden movement, any sign of resistance, any show of anger could be used as an excuse to make things much worse. Even though she was completely innocent, even though she was being treated unfairly, she knew that her safety depended on staying calm. "Officer, I can show you my registration and identification," she said, speaking slowly and clearly. "This is absolutely my vehicle." She started to reach toward her purse, moving slowly and deliberately so there could be no misunderstanding about what she was doing. But Derek's response was immediate and aggressive. "Don't move," he shouted, his hand moving closer to his weapon. "Turn around and put your hands on the car, now!" People walking by on the sidewalk started to stop and stare. Some of them pulled out their phones and began recording the interaction. This was exactly the kind of situation that had been making headlines. Lately, police officers treating innocent people badly because of their race. Derek noticed the growing crowd and the phones, pointed in his direction, but instead of making him reconsider his actions, it made him more aggressive. He felt like his authority was being challenged, and he didn't like being watched and judged. Amelia realized that this situation was quickly getting out of control. She could see the anger in Derek's eyes, the tension in his body, the way his hand kept moving toward his weapon. She knew that one wrong move, one misunderstanding, could turn this traffic stop into something much more serious. As she placed her hands on her car as ordered, she tried to think of a way to de-escalate the situation. She was a judge, someone who understood the law better than most people. She knew her rights, but she also knew that asserting those rights in this moment could be dangerous. The crowd was getting larger, and more phones were recording. Whatever happened next would likely be seen by thousands of people online within hours. Derek was about to find out that he had made a terrible mistake, but he was too blinded by his prejudices to see it coming. The confrontation was reaching its peak, and everything was about to change in ways that neither of them could have imagined. With her hands pressed against the cold metal of her BMW, Judge Amelia Richardson felt a familiar burning sensation in her chest. It was the same feeling she got whenever she witnessed injustice in her courtroom, a mixture of anger, disappointment, and determination. But this time she wasn't wearing her judicial robes. This time she was the victim of the very system she had spent her life serving. Officer Derek Thompson stood behind her, feeling proud of what he thought was good police work. In his mind, he had successfully stopped a crime in progress. He was already imagining how he would write up the report, how he would describe catching this woman red-handed with a stolen vehicle. He might even get recognition for his quick thinking and decisive action. Derek had never questioned his methods or his assumptions. Throughout his career, he had operated under the belief that his instincts were always right. When he saw someone who looked suspicious to him, he acted first and asked questions later. It had worked for him so far, or at least he thought it had. The truth was that Derek's definition of suspicious was heavily influenced by his racial biases. A white person standing next to an expensive car would be assumed to be the owner. A black person in the same situation was automatically assumed to be a criminal. It was a double standard that Derek wasn't even aware he applied. "You know what I think happened here?" Derek said, his voice full of confidence and condescension. He walked around to face Amelia, wanting to see her reaction to his theory. "I think you saw this nice car sitting here, and you thought you could just take it for a joyride. Maybe sell it to some chop shop for quick cash." Amelia kept her voice steady, even though inside she was fighting to control her emotions. "Officer Thompson," she said, reading his name badge. "I understand you're just doing your job, but you're making a mistake. This is my car. I bought it with my own money, and I have all the paperwork to prove it." Derek scoffed at her explanation. He had heard similar stories countless times before, or so he believed. In his experience, criminals always had elaborate explanations for why they were innocent. They always claimed to own whatever they were caught with. They always had some story about how they came to be in possession of stolen property. Save the sob story for someone who believes it? Derek replied harshly. You think I was born yesterday? You think I don't know a car thief when I see one? The crowd of onlookers continued to grow. People were stopping on their way home from dinner, coming out of nearby shops, gathering on the sidewalk to watch what was happening. Most of them were holding up their phones, recording every word and every action. Some people in the crowd were shaking their heads in disgust at what they were witnessing. They could see that Derek was treating Amelia badly for no good reason. They could hear the disrespect in his voice, see the unfair assumptions he was making. But Derek was too focused on what he thought was his moment of triumph to pay attention to the crowd's reaction. He was so convinced that he was right that he couldn't see how wrong he was being. Here's what's going to happen, Derek continued, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. I'm going to run the plates on this vehicle, and when it comes back stolen, you're going to be in serious trouble. Grand theft auto, possession of stolen property, maybe some other charges too. He was already thinking about how this arrest would look on his record. Car theft was a serious crime, and catching someone in the act would reflect well on his performance reviews. He might even get a commendation or a promotion out of this. Amelia felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She had dedicated her entire career to upholding the law and ensuring that people were treated fairly by the justice system. Now she was experiencing firsthand how unfairly that same system could treat people based on nothing but their appearance. Officer Thompson, please listen to me, she said, turning slightly to face him while keeping her hands visible. I am telling you the truth. This is my car. I can prove it to you if you'll just let me show you my identification and registration. But Derek wasn't interested in listening. He had already made up his mind about what was happening, and nothing she could say was going to change it. This was the problem with his approach to policing. He decided first and looked for evidence second. The only thing you need to prove to me is why I shouldn't arrest you right now, Derek shot back. And so far, you're not doing a very good job of that. He pulled out his radio and called in to dispatch. This is Unit 47. I need you to run a plate for me. Black BMW license number. He read off the numbers from Amelia's license plate. While they waited for the response, Derek continued his aggressive questioning. So tell me, where did you steal this car from? Was it from one of these fancy restaurants around here? Maybe from someone's driveway in the suburbs? Amelia realized that no matter what she said, Derek wasn't going to believe her. He had constructed a narrative in his mind where she was guilty, and he was determined to make the facts fit that narrative, rather than the other way around. But Amelia was not just any victim of racial profiling. She was a judge with years of experience dealing with difficult situations. She knew the law better than Derek did, and she knew her rights. Most importantly, she knew how to stay calm under pressure. Officer Thompson, she said with the authority that came from years of commanding courtrooms, I want to be very clear about something. I have not committed any crime. I have not stolen anything. I am standing next to my own vehicle, which I purchased legally with my own money. I am being cooperative and respectful, and I expect the same treatment in return. Her tone was firm but not confrontational. She was asserting her rights without being aggressive. She was using the skills she had developed as a lawyer and a judge to try to de-escalate the situation. But Derek didn't recognize the authority in her voice. All he saw was a suspect who was getting uppity and trying to tell him how to do his job. This made him even more determined to show her who was in charge. You don't get to make demands here, lady, Derek replied angrily. I'm the one with the badge. I'm the one asking the questions. And until I'm satisfied that you're telling the truth, you're going to keep your mouth shut and do exactly what I tell you. The radio crackled to life with a response from dispatch. Unit 47, that vehicle is not reported stolen. Registration shows it belongs to. There was a pause as the dispatcher read the information. Amelia Richardson, age 45. No outstanding warrants, no criminal record. Derek's confidence wavered for just a moment when he heard that the car wasn't stolen. But instead of admitting his mistake, he doubled down on his accusations. Registration could be fake, he said, mostly to himself. Or maybe she stole the car so recently that it hasn't been reported yet. Or maybe she's got connections helping her cover it up. Amelia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Even when presented with evidence that she was telling the truth, Derek was inventing new theories to justify his treatment of her. This wasn't about finding the truth. This was about Derek refusing to admit he was wrong. The situation was about to reach a turning point. Amelia knew she had to do something to end this humiliation and clear up the misunderstanding. She was about to reveal something that would change everything, something that would force Derek to confront the reality of what he had done. The moment of truth was coming, and Derek Thompson had no idea how badly he had misjudged the situation. The tension in the air was thick, as Judge Amelia Richardson stood with her hands against her car, surrounded by a growing crowd of witnesses. Officer Derek Thompson was still convinced he had caught a criminal, even though the evidence was already proving him wrong. But Amelia knew it was time to end this charade once and for all. She had tried being polite. She had tried being cooperative. She had tried explaining the situation calmly and rationally. Nothing had worked because Derek wasn't interested in the truth. He was only interested in being right. But now she was going to show him exactly how wrong he was. Taking a deep breath, Amelia slowly turned around to face Derek. Her movements were deliberate and careful, making sure that no one could mistake her intentions. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something important was about to happen. "Officer Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the authority that came from 25 years in the legal profession, "I am going to reach into my purse now to retrieve my identification. I want you and everyone watching to understand exactly what is happening here." Derek's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. He was still operating under the assumption that she was dangerous, still believing his own prejudiced narrative about who she was and what she represented. "I told you not to move," Derek shouted, but there was less confidence in his voice now. Something about the way Amelia was speaking, the calm authority in her tone, was making him question himself for the first time. "Officer Thompson, I am Judge Amelia Richardson of the County Superior Court," she announced clearly, making sure her words carried to all the people recording the interaction. "I am reaching for my judicial identification to prove who I am and to end this unnecessary confrontation." The words hit Derek like a physical blow. Judge, did she just say she was a judge? That was impossible. She had to be lying. There was no way this woman he had been treating like a common criminal could be a judge. But even as he tried to deny what he had heard, doubt began to creep into his mind. There was something different about her, something he hadn't noticed before. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the confidence in her voice. It wasn't what he expected from a car thief. Amelia slowly reached into her purse, her movements visible to everyone around. She pulled out her wallet and opened it to reveal her judicial identification card. The official seal of the court gleamed under the streetlights. Her photograph, her name, her title, everything was clearly visible. "Here is my identification, Officer Thompson," she said, holding it up so he could see it clearly. "I am a sitting judge in this county. I have served on the bench for 5 years and practiced law for 20 years before that. This BMW is my personal vehicle, purchased with my own money, registered in my own name." Derek stared at the identification card, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The official seal looked real. The photograph matched the woman standing in front of him. The name matched what dispatch had told him when he ran the license plate. But accepting that she was telling the truth meant accepting that he had made a terrible mistake. It meant acknowledging that he had racially profiled a sitting judge, treated her like a criminal, and humiliated her in front of dozens of witnesses who were recording every moment. This has to be fake," Derek stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. He was grasping at straws now, desperately trying to avoid facing the reality of what he had done. Amelia looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and pity. She had seen this kind of denial before in her courtroom, when defendants were confronted with overwhelming evidence of their guilt. The difference was that Derek wasn't a defendant. He was supposed to be an officer of the law, someone dedicated to truth and justice. "Officer Thompson, you can verify my identity very easily," she said patiently. "Call the courthouse. Call your supervisor. Check your department's records. I am exactly who I say I am." The crowd around them was getting larger and more vocal. People were talking among themselves, expressing their outrage at what they had witnessed. Some were calling out to Derek, telling him he should apologize. Others were shouting about police misconduct and racial profiling. Derek looked around at all the phones pointed in his direction, all the people watching his every move. He realized that this interaction was being recorded from multiple angles and would probably be all over social media within hours. If he had really just confronted a sitting judge like this, his career was in serious trouble. But Derek still couldn't bring himself to admit his mistake. His pride, his ego, and his deep-seated prejudices were all fighting against the evidence in front of him. "Even if you are who you say you are," Derek said weakly, "I had every right to investigate a suspicious situation. You fit the profile of someone who might be involved in criminal activity." Those words hung in the air like a confession. Derek had just admitted in front of dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras that he had profiled Amelia based on her appearance. He had essentially confessed to the very thing that civil rights advocates had been complaining about for years. Amelia felt a surge of anger at Derek's words, but she channeled that anger into something more productive. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person of color who had ever been harassed, humiliated, or worse by officers who made assumptions based on race. "Officer Thompson," she said, her voice rising slightly, "let me be very clear about what just happened here. You saw a black woman standing next to an expensive car, and you immediately assumed I was a criminal. You didn't consider that I might be the owner. You didn't look for any evidence of wrongdoing. You simply decided, based on the color of my skin and your own prejudices, that I didn't belong here." Derek tried to interrupt, to offer some kind of justification for his actions, but Amelia wasn't finished. "You ordered me to put my hands on my car like I was under arrest. You accused me of stealing my own vehicle. You dismissed everything I said because you had already decided I was guilty, and when dispatch confirmed that the car was registered to me, you invented new theories rather than admit you were wrong." Every word Amelia spoke was being captured by the phones around them. Her calm, measured delivery made Derek's aggressive behavior look even worse by comparison. She was demonstrating exactly what dignity and professionalism looked like, highlighting just how badly Derek had failed to meet those standards. Derek's face was turning red with embarrassment and anger. He knew he was beaten, but he couldn't bring himself to admit it. His training, his experience, his whole worldview, everything was telling him that he couldn't be wrong about something this important. But the evidence was overwhelming. The identification was real. The registration matched. Dispatch had confirmed everything. And now he was facing a crowd of angry witnesses and a judge who knew the law better than he ever would. The moment of truth had arrived. And Derek Thompson was about to learn that his prejudices had led him to make the biggest mistake of his career. The woman he had treated like a criminal was about to become the person who would hold him accountable for his actions. Everything was about to change, and there was no going back. The street corner that had been quiet just 30 minutes earlier was now buzzing with activity. Word had spread quickly through social media that a police officer was confronting a black judge, and more people were arriving to witness what was happening. Officer Derek Thompson stood frozen, staring at Judge Amelia Richardson's identification card, as the full weight of his mistake crashed down on him. Derek's hands were shaking slightly as he looked at the official judicial ID. There was no denying it now. The seal was authentic. The photograph matched, and everything about it screamed legitimacy. He had just spent the last 20 minutes treating one of the county's most respected judges like a common criminal. But it was more than just a case of mistaken identity. Derek was starting to remember where he had heard the name Amelia Richardson before. She wasn't just any judge. She was the same judge who had been featured in the local newspaper just last month for her work on criminal justice reform. She had been pushing for better police training, stricter accountability measures, and policies to address racial bias in law enforcement. Derek felt sick to his stomach as he realized the irony of the situation. The very judge who had been advocating for police reform had just experienced firsthand the kind of biased policing she had been trying to eliminate, and it had all been captured on camera from multiple angles. "Your Honor," Derek began, his voice barely above a whisper. I apologize. I didn't realize who you were. I was just doing my job, trying to—" "Stop right there," Amelia interrupted, her voice firm but controlled. "This isn't about who I am, Officer Thompson. This is about how you treated me before you knew who I was. This is about the assumptions you made based on nothing but my skin color." The crowd around them had grown to nearly 50 people, and more were arriving every minute. Some were filming with their phones, others were taking pictures, and a few were live streaming the entire confrontation. The hashtag #JudgeProfiled was already trending on social media. Amelia looked around at all the faces watching them, people of all races and ages who had stopped their evening routines to witness this moment of injustice. She saw anger in some faces, disappointment in others, and recognition in many. These people had seen this scenario before or experienced it themselves. "Officer Thompson," Amelia continued, "your apology doesn't change what happened here tonight. You saw a black woman near an expensive car and immediately jumped to the conclusion that a crime was being committed. You didn't look for evidence. You didn't consider alternatives. You simply acted on your prejudices." Derek tried to defend himself, but his words sounded hollow even to him. "I was being cautious. In this neighborhood with a car like that, I was just trying to protect the community." "Protect the community from what?" Amelia asked pointedly. "From a successful black woman who worked hard to afford a nice car? From someone who has dedicated her life to serving justice? From a tax-paying citizen who was simply trying to go home after dinner?" Her questions hit Derek like hammer blows. Each one forced him to confront the ugly reality of his actions and the prejudices that had motivated them. He had no good answers because there were no good answers. A local news van pulled up to the scene, having been alerted by someone who had posted the incident on social media. A reporter and camera crew quickly set up, adding to the circus atmosphere that was developing around the confrontation. Derek realized that his career was probably over. This incident would be investigated by internal affairs, reviewed by his superiors, and likely result in disciplinary action or termination. But more than that, he would forever be known as the cop who racially profiled a sitting judge. "Your Honor," he said, trying one last time to salvage something from the situation, "I made a mistake. I'm sorry, but I hope you can understand that police officers have to make quick decisions and sometimes we get it wrong." Amelia looked at him with a mixture of sadness and determination. She had heard this excuse countless times in her courtroom, the claim that split-second decisions justified bad actions. But she knew better. "Officer Thompson, this wasn't a split-second decision," she replied. "This was a pattern of thinking that led you to see me as a threat rather than a citizen. This was bias that made you assume guilt instead of innocence. And this was prejudice that blinded you to the truth even when it was right in front of you." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "I've been a judge for 5 years and I've seen cases like this before. I've seen how racial profiling destroys trust between police and communities. I've seen how it traumatizes innocent people and perpetuates injustice. Tonight I experienced it myself." The reporter approached with her microphone, asking if she could get a statement from both parties. Derek tried to walk away, but Amelia agreed to speak on camera. "What happened here tonight is exactly why we need police reform," Amelia told the reporter, her judicial composure intact despite everything she had just endured. "No one should be treated like a criminal simply because of their race. No one should have to prove their innocence when they've done nothing wrong." Derek stood nearby listening to Amelia's interview, and knowing that every word she spoke was true. He had let his prejudices guide his actions, and now he was facing the consequences. Over the next few days, the video of the confrontation went viral across multiple social media platforms. The hashtag #ToYourJudgeProfiled was shared millions of times, sparking conversations about racial bias in policing across the country. News outlets picked up the story, and it became a national symbol of the work that still needed to be done to address systemic racism. Derek Thompson was suspended from the police force pending an investigation. The Internal Affairs Review found that he had violated several department policies regarding respectful treatment of citizens and proper procedures for vehicle stops. He was ultimately terminated from the force and struggled to find work in law enforcement elsewhere. But Judge Amelia Richardson chose to turn this negative experience into something positive. She used the attention from the incident to push for comprehensive police reform measures in her county. She worked with community leaders, police officials, and lawmakers to implement new training programs focused on bias awareness and de-escalation techniques. She also established a citizen oversight committee to review complaints of police misconduct, ensuring that incidents like hers would be properly investigated and addressed. Her experience that night became a catalyst for meaningful change in how law enforcement interacted with the community. 6 months later, Amelia was invited to speak at a national conference on criminal justice reform. She told the story of that evening, not as a victim but as someone who had used adversity to create positive change. What happened to me that night was wrong, she told the audience, but it also opened my eyes to the reality that many people in our communities face every day. As judges, as lawyers, as citizens, we have a responsibility to ensure that justice is truly blind, that people are judged by their actions, not by their appearance. The incident on that quiet street corner had lasted less than an hour, but its impact would be felt for years to come. It had ended Derek Thompson's career in law enforcement, but more importantly, it had strengthened the resolve of a judge who was determined to make the justice system more just for everyone. Judge Amelia Richardson had transformed a moment of humiliation into a powerful force for change, proving that even in the face of prejudice and injustice, dignity and determination could prevail. Her response to that night had silenced her accuser forever, not through anger or revenge, but through the quiet power of turning wrong into right.